Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, January 25th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the United States Senate elections yet again, discussing United States Senator Rob Portman from the state of Ohio. He is announcing that he is no longer running for re-election. He initially had every intention of running for Senate. There was no real indication that he was going to retire. He did not need to. He's a popular senator from Ohio. He's a Republican senator, someone who won by a very large amount, more than any other Democrat has in the past, in modern, I guess not necessarily modern, but Obama-era Ohio Democrats. So looking at Rob Portman's performance in numerous previous elections, I think that this is a very good showing for the Democrats, a good sign about what might actually unfold in 2022. What is expected to be a Republican wave year might actually end up being more substantial for the Democrats than they previously thought. And we'll talk about why this has a very sudden implication on the outcome of the 2022 Senate elections, because retirement and people that are no longer going to run for re-election is an early sign of something that is not beneficial for a certain political party. And so far, the only type of major resignations, or not necessarily resignations, retirements that we have seen so far are on the Republican Party side. 3 states that are normally competitive on the presidential level now have 3 Republican senators that are retiring before 2022. Not running for re-election in 2022. So I always intertwine resign and retire, even though they mean completely different things. Forgive me if I make a mistake in my speech about that. For whatever reason, I haven't really differentiated the two in my speech. I know the difference, just sometimes I may end up saying the wrong thing. So apologies in advance and for any type of mistakes I've made in the past minute or so. So, who is Rob Portman? Well, I mentioned he's a popular United States senator, and we actually have pretty substantial proof of that. I mean, he went to a very easy pathway in re-election in 2016. He won in the state of Ohio by a very considerable amount, despite the Democrats, coming not necessarily close in Ohio, but much closer than Ted Strickland did. The Democrats lost Ohio by 20 percentage points, 21 percentage points. Rob Portman did so well that the Democrats were only really able to win 4 counties, 3 major cities, and then 1 outskirt county where the Democrats won by 14 points. This is Athens in, Ohio. So we're talking about a pretty liberal, pretty localized area, university-type territory. So looking at the results in the Senate election in 2016, one would immediately assume, Rob Portman is a shoo-in for 2022. And I did agree with that. When we talked about the 2022 Senate elections and I brought up the competitive map, Ohio was already filled in solid for the GOP. In my predictions, and even in the Democratic Party's best case scenario, I put Ohio in the likely Republican column. We're talking about a best case scenario where the Democrats can only lose it by a likely margin. So looking at Ohio, Rob Portman was an easy victory for the Republican Party. And now that he is retiring, well, I think that's definitely an indicator of what might actually unfold in 2022, because this is expected to be a Biden, anti-Biden wave year, a red wave year, a Republican victory in the House and possibly winning back the Senate. That was all in discussion for 2022. But now as we start to see more and more retirements, races are starting to become more competitive. The thing about Rob Portman was he's a popular incumbent. With him out, it reverts back to its traditional swing state / lean R characterization. The Democrats may have performed poorly in Ohio on the presidential level, but do not forget that the Republicans performed so poorly in a number of states that they won in 2016. We can actually take a look at historical elections, because I think it's important to note that not a single state besides, maybe the most extremely partisan ones, maybe Wyoming for the Democrats and, Massachusetts for the Republicans. Other than that, I would say a number of states are in contention. Maybe not immediately, but I think that in the future, absolutely, including 2022. Take a look at the swing in some of these states. Look at the margin of victory for Obama in the Rust Belt. It was larger than Trump's victory in Ohio. The Republicans certainly did not count out the Rust Belt just because Obama won Michigan by 17 percentage points, or Wisconsin by 14 percentage points, or Pennsylvania by 10 percentage points, or Iowa by 10 percentage points. What they did was continue to fight for the state through 2012, narrowed it down, the same way the Democrats did in Georgia, the same way they did in Texas, the same way they did in Arizona. Eventually, it will pay off. 8 years after, Obama wins Ohio by 5 points, Trump wins it by 8 points. The good thing about this website is we can actually compare the swing. Let's look at 2016 versus 2008. Look at all of that red in this region. Had the Republicans given up the same way I've seen some Democratic operatives talk about Ohio, they would have never won Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio. The thing about the American electorate is that it can swing very easily, and not necessarily easily, very quickly, and can swing in very large margins. Biden won Georgia and Arizona due to a continuous effort by the Democratic Party. They recognized the possibility of it being a swing state in the future, and they jumped on it. And it paid off. It may have taken 24, 28 years, but it paid off. And that's the ultimate lesson for Democrats. I think that, giving up any singular state, unless it's extremely partisan, is bad for the Democrats. Because what I've seen so far, at least in the elections that I've covered, is that while the Democrats may focus on some states, they certainly do give up others. They certainly do, not run candidates. And I think it's super crucial to run candidates in every single race because you need that infrastructure. You see, North Carolina, based off the House popular vote, would have gone to the Democrats in 2020 had they ran a candidate in the 3rd district. Yes, the Republicans still likely would have won by 30 percentage points, but it still would have had, 30 points that the Democrats would have won in that district. But since there was no candidate, the Republicans won 100% of the vote. If Democrats don't have anyone to vote for, they may be less inclined to vote for Democrats in the future. It seems as if the party doesn't care about that district, about that Senate race, about that presidential race. If they're not heavily focusing on it, they're going to turn on them, the same way the Rust Belt did in 2016. And I think Ohio, while it may not be immediately competitive, and I don't think that this race is going to start out as anything but, lean for the Republicans, now it's lean. Best case was likely. It has since dropped down to lean. Likely is a possible scenario for the Republicans. Lean seems to be the most probable one at the moment. And that's why I think it's really important to note this retirement is a sign. Because in a Republican wave year, not a single type of Republican would say, I want to leave, unless they're doing it for health reasons, unless they're doing it for personal reasons. But what Rob Portman is telling us, he's retiring because of partisan gridlock. This is Washington, D.C. Partisan gridlock is part of the job. That's not the real reason why he's retiring. I don't think he thinks his race is competitive, but he definitely has some issues with the Republican Party. And this may be the start of the Republican Party, not necessarily building up to 2022 being a red wave year. Because Rob Portman is a very good indicator for a number of other Republicans because he won his last race by a very considerable amount. He won by 20 percentage points, and he still doesn't want to run in 2022. He still does not want to run because of the Republican Party. This would have been an easy sweep, an easy, safe race, but now this opens up the race to being competitive. Democrats have already started fundraising for this race, and we'll talk about Tim Ryan in just a moment, but they immediately sent out fundraising emails to their constituents trying to win back the Ohio Senate race in 2022. This would not have been on the Democratic Party's radar had Rob Portman stayed in the race, and this was super unexpected. I didn't even think Rob Portman could consider retiring. I did not think that this is something that was even in discussion. This definitely took a lot of people by surprise, including the Republican senators, because they need the Senate majority more than anything, and this only makes it more difficult for them to win it back in 2022. And while I do think that 2022 will start out with the advantage for the Republican Party, I think that this is something that definitely has put a halt in the immediate energy type of wave, because what you see typically in off election years is that there are, the incumbent party in the White House usually sees heavy waves of resignations. In 2018, 50 plus House Republicans retired. They were afraid of losing re-election. They no longer wanted to be a part of the party that was so disliked by the American people at that time. And you can't argue that they weren't disliked. That was a year where the Democrats won the popular vote in the Senate by 20 percentage points and in the House by 8 percentage points. It was a Democratic wave year based off the numbers, based off everything that we see. Yes, Republicans gained seats in the Senate, but also based off the 2016 election results, Republicans should have won 60 seats in the United States Senate, not 53. But that's besides the point. But looking at everything that I've seen so far, usually you would expect the incumbent party to retire because incumbents are afraid of losing re-election. They want to go out as the Republican or the Democrat or the Republican who won their previous election and retired on their own free will, was not defeated by the people, was not told by the people that they no longer want to be represented by them. And that's probably the worst fear for a lot of incumbents. But I don't think that was the case with Rob Portman. I don't think he thought he was going to lose, more so that he didn't fundamentally agree with the new Republican Party. Partisan gridlock is not new. That is an excuse. That is an excuse politicians do. This is not something that is brand new to politicians, ever. Partisan gridlock dates back to the 1700s. So I think, this is largely due to the fact that the party has definitely shifted away from people like Rob Portman, more to Donald Trump. And I think this is also something that, Republicans are going to eye up as, sure, they will probably retain the seat, but that primary is going to be super competitive. But since we've talked about Republicans, let's talk about the Democratic Party. Let's talk about how the Democratic Party, let's talk about how the Democratic Party is going to go ahead and swoop in here and try to win the Senate race. Well, a little background information. We know so far that the Democrats did not win it on the 2020 presidential election. That did not happen. The Democrats lost to Donald Trump by the same exact percentage as they did in 2016. Nothing shifted between 2016 and 2020. It was the smallest shift, I believe, on the presidential map. Nevada might have been narrowly closer. Nevada shifted by 0.017%, Ohio by 0.03%. It was super, super narrow. The Democrats narrowly shifted in Ohio. They narrowly shifted in New York. They narrowly shifted in Nebraska. They narrowly shifted in D.C. But Ohio was the closest state that shifted towards the Democrats by 0.03%. Even Iowa shifted by more than a percentage point. So looking at Joe Biden's performance, you might discount the Democratic Party. But might I remind you, historical elections tell all. Take a look at the swing from 2008 to 2012 in Wisconsin. In Michigan, yes, it was a lot, but Obama still won Pennsylvania by 6, Michigan by nearly 10, Wisconsin by 7. I mean, the victories here for Obama were still pretty trouncing, still pretty large. 2016, however, was a much more heavy swing because Republicans continued to fight for it. They didn't give it up immediately just because of a few poor election performances. And that's exactly what I think the Democratic Party might actually do and end up, losing the race by a larger margin than they should. But so far, looking at the election results, you might at face value say the Democrats should not contest this Ohio Senate race or focus a lot of money on it. But running candidates trying to win races reminds voters that you are still there. And in the event when they will, it's going to happen at some point. Certain states are going to flip. Ohio is still a swing state, even though Trump won it. You didn't say, Michigan wouldn't be a swing state in 2020 just because Obama won there once. And then all of a sudden, 28 years of voting for Democrats. And then, Trump swoops in. I mean, the track record speaks for itself, saying the Democrats absolutely have it in the bag. But we knew that wasn't true. States swing considerably in just a very short period of time. And I think 2 years may not be necessarily the largest amount of time for a state to swing, but it could be competitive. And I think Tim Ryan is definitely one of the best candidates the Democratic Party can run. And Tim Ryan also is someone who I think definitely is nearing the edge of being a representative from the state of Ohio. He's pretty high up in terms of the way the Democrats view him in the United States House of Representatives. He ran for president in the 2020 election. He's had pretty okay races when it came down to, his electoral history. When he represented the 17th district, he won by pretty large margins. When he represented the 13th district, his current district, he won by very large margins up until 2020. That's when it really narrowed down by a pretty considerable amount. He narrowly won this race. He was supposed to win it by 20 points. So this was sort of the end for his House era. If it ends up being a Republican wave year in 2022, he's better off running for the Senate than he is running for the House of Representatives. But also, redistricting will take into effect, and his district is going to be gone. They're going to put him into a more competitive district, or he can try to run against another Democrat incumbent in a primary, but 2022 Senate definitely seems like one of the best places for him to go. He's already started sending out ads about, raising money. I think he's going to run for Senate here. Republicans are also likely to field some people who are going to replace Rob Portman. One of the more notable names that I'm sure everyone here would recognize is John Kasich. He is not going to run in the United States Senate election. But Jim Jordan could run. He's definitely the more, pro-Trump, more right-wing candidate in this race. And I think many Democrats actually want him to run. Because if he runs in this Senate election, while he may be able to win, he'd definitely be one of the easiest ones to beat. While he definitely has close ties to Donald Trump, no one will ever really replicate what Donald Trump did in this state. They will either win based off of crossover support, but never with this type of campaign style. No one can match Trump's energy. No one can bring out crowds like Donald Trump, even with a Trump endorsement, which undoubtedly he will get, or one of these Republicans will get. It still isn't enough. The same way we saw David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler pull much, much, much smaller crowds than Donald Trump, much smaller crowds than Donald Trump. And even though they may have tried to embody President Trump, especially Kelly Loeffler, it simply didn't work because they were not him. But for these Republicans that want to run, Jim Jordan, makes sense that he wants to run. He's an opportunist. Every Republican or a Democrat or independent is in the United States Senate and House. It makes sense. Josh Mandel, someone who dropped out of the 2018 Senate race, well, pretty much just said that he was not going to run, didn't necessarily drop out, would have won probably in 2018 had the environment been pro for the Republican Party. I think that Sherrod Brown definitely would have held on narrowly, but I do think that he would have been a much more better candidate than Jim Renacci. We can actually see Jim Renacci. We can see he's actually a potential candidate. He lost in 2018, but he lost by 7 percentage points. It was a Democratic environment where they won by 8 points, so a narrow underperformance for Sherrod Brown, but still, Ohio had just voted for Donald Trump by 8 percentage points. So we'll talk about why the Democrats, should still contest it, because 2018 was not a fluke. Just because it was a Democratic wave year, if it was, based off the national results, it should have evened out. Republicans won in Ohio by 8 points. Democrats won nationally by 8 points. It should have narrowed out. But Sherrod Brown did better, I would say. Maybe he could have had a much easier pathway had he ran against a different Republican, but I also think that when you're looking at the 2018 results, it should definitely be one of the main things that Democrats look at to talk about their competitive nature in the state. It may not seem like that on the presidential level or when Donald Trump is on the ballot, but when he's off the ballot, they certainly do have a pretty good chance. They had an open race in the governor election, and they only lost by 4%. So when it comes down to, traditional Republicans, traditional Democrats, it's still a moderately competitive race. They may not have the advantage. Republicans definitely do, but it doesn't mean it's not competitive, because that's exactly, that type of thinking would have prevented Democrats from winning Arizona and winning in Georgia. The races had sometimes been very, very close, but, even though they may have been very, very close in times, you also have to realize that had Democrats, just given up just because they lost a few races by 3-4 points, they would have never won it in 2020. So I think Democrats should absolutely contest this race. They have won here before, and we'll talk about the last time a Democrat won in the Senate election. But there's discussions about who could possibly run in the state of Ohio. All comes down to that. But now, Ohio could end up joining the swing column. And we'll talk about what that actually means in just a moment as well. We're going to focus on the last Democrat to win in this state. We have to go back to 2018. 2012 was when Sherrod Brown won this Senate race. This is the race he won in 2006 for the first time, I believe. Yeah, he ran against Mike DeWine, who is now the incumbent senator from the state, not senator, governor from the state of Ohio. But Sherrod Brown won in 2006, won again in 2012, and then 2018 rolled around. It was a year that the Democratic Party definitely did very well, and Sherrod Brown won 53.4 to 46.6. If you actually take a look at the 2020 presidential election results, it looks very similar for Donald Trump's victory compared to Sherrod Brown. So Sherrod Brown certainly has won this race before. I mean, he has won the Senate race since 2006. And not to say, he's not going to be the one who's up in 2022, but Democrats have had a candidate who has won before, and they need to replicate these type of victories. They need to replicate these type of victories. And if the Republicans do nominate someone like Jim Jordan or another Republican who can't necessarily embody President Trump, well, that could end up being their downfall. That could end up being the thing that solidifies an election victory for the Democratic Party. Even though it may be unlikely, a perfect storm would have to happen. But better storms than perfect have happened for the Democratic Party enough to win them Senate races that they really didn't think were winnable. Georgia, Alabama, there are a number of examples on both sides. But recently, the Democrats have come out in the advantage in some of these Senate races. Republicans have in other ones, but overall the Democrats now control the United States Senate for a reason. Because they still focus on states. John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were viewed as sacrificial lambs. They were immediately written off, and they just won 2 Senate races there. And John Ossoff's going to be up in 2026, so 5 years from now. That definitely was a deafening blow to the GOP. But looking at Sherrod Brown, if Democrats were able to take someone like him and the Republicans nominate someone who's unenthusiastic, it's possible that this race now returns to being a swing state. From what was a very solid state for the GOP that I characterized as likely Republican at best for the Democratic Party, now that Rob Portman is out, we could see a number of other Republicans follow suit. And that in turn could make not only Ohio competitive, but if Chuck Grassley decides against running in Iowa. All indicators say he's going to run. He's a very popular Republican like Rob Portman, but if he chooses not to, well, that's one less safe Republican seat. That is one less safe Republican seat. You see, the Democrats are secure in literally all of their 46 races. They don't even have to worry about anyone retiring. All of the races that would have mattered are already competitive. For the Republicans, however, Iowa and Ohio were super secure. They were absolute. But now, if we see a retirement in Iowa, and we're already seeing one in Ohio, it opens up the possibility of them being competitive and possibly swing states on the Senate level. And like I'd mentioned before, when you're looking at the senators and the representatives that retire, usually it has to do with the fact that the incumbent party is unpopular. That usually has to see, we see retirements in some states that are held by the incumbent political party because they are afraid of losing a re-election bid. But so far, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all states that are targeted by Democrats on the national level, now have retiring Republicans. And the Democrats have 0 retiring Democrats so far. So I think this is definitely an indicator that maybe 2022 won't be as good of a year for the Republican Party as they think. It may not be a year that they win by a pretty large amount because the early warning signs were there in 2018, in 2017. They told us what was going to happen a year and a half in advance. And that's beginning to see, what we're seeing right now, we're beginning to see it unfold. We're beginning to see the GOP sort of retire in some of these races. They really do not need to be retiring. Because if it truly was a Republican wave year, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio would be solid for the GOP. But now that these incumbents are gone, the states revert back to their traditional swing state status. And that is not good for the GOP because at a 50-50 tie, they need every seat they can get, and they simply aren't getting it. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my post-2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.